Hello there YouTube. Today I will be showing you how to replace the carburetor on a Kohler Comand 17.5 horsepower engine that is powering a John Deere L110 automatic. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to unplug this cord which goes to your solenoid right here, your fuel solenoid that goes and basically won't allow your engine to backfire. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to remove this hose clamp right here with a pair of pliers. And we're just going to wiggle that back. And now we will attempt to undo this fuel line, which might be a bit of a challenge. Okay, so I disconnected that wire and the fuel line. Now you want to keep a container down below in case if it starts to leak out some fuel. This is old fuel line and I didn't feel like dealing with it, so I just went ahead and cut it because I do have extra fuel line. So our next part will be removing these two nuts right here, which are 10 millimeter. There's two of them right there that hold the carburetor and your air filter housing on there. So now we will go ahead and remove these two nuts, which are 10 millimeter. I went ahead and broke them loose. You don't want to lose track of these because you will have a very bad day having to get new hardware for this. So now that I got both of them off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the air filter housing separately from the carburetor. Maybe if I can get it, that would probably help. Actually, what I forgot is you have this breather tube that goes into your air filter housing. You want to be sure to pop that out. I went ahead and popped it out of here because it's easier, but you can pop it out of either the air filter housing or your valve cover. And so now your air filter housing will come off from your carburetor. So now at this point we can go ahead and get these two little cables unhooked. One of them is your choke, which is this front one, and your rear one would be your throttle. Now it's very important that you do not, if these have multiple holes on them, you do not want to get these confused or put these back in the wrong holes. You want to make sure you put these back in the correct holes that they are supposed to go onto. Otherwise it can mess up your carburetor and you'd have to retune it or refix something. Another thing that I forgot to mention before you take your carburetor off, I mean you can take these cables off next, but there's this wire that runs off your carburetor and into your engine, like the block of your engine. You want to be sure to remove that. That's your ground wire. Otherwise you won't be able to take the carburetor off, and this takes an 8 millimeter socket to take off. So just go ahead and loosen this off. Again, you don't want to lose this bolt at all. It's pretty important because without your ground, some of your electronics on your carburetor won't work quite right. And yeah, so just keep track of that bolt, where that went. So now we can go ahead and get both of these cables off, and you just got to kind of wiggle them around. You might have to take the carburetor off and then kind of wiggle these cables around until you get them off, but don't bend them or break them. Otherwise you'll need to get new cables. Okay, so I went ahead and removed these cables just off camera because they're a lot harder to get one-handed rather than two-handed. And so now the carburetor will be able to slide off freely, and you have your old carburetor right here. Now, if your carburetor doesn't need, or if you don't think you need a new carburetor and you just want to clean it out, you can do that. Just be very careful. There's a lot of small parts. If you don't know what you're doing with carburetors, I'd recommend taking it to either someone or a place that knows what they're doing. Another thing is, when you go to install the new one, you want to make sure this surface is nice and clean. You don't have any of the old gasket sticking on there. Now, on this carburetor, I got lucky and all the gasket came off with the old carburetor. So that's just something to keep in mind. If your part of your gasket stayed on here or ripped on here, you want to be able to scrape that off, but be careful not to scrape the actual block of the engine because then you won't get a good seal with all those grooves. So now I have went ahead and cleaned off the surface of the block of the engine so that way it's not like a double gasket or making a improper seal. So I went ahead and put the gasket on already, so we got that on. I got these throttle cables all hooked back up. Now when you put your carburetor on, you want to make sure you want to put your choke on your outside because that's where it's supposed to go. And you know it's your choke because there's like a little spring, so every time you push on it, it goes right back. See? So we're going to go ahead and put the carburetor on all the way. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to get our gasket, which is for our air filter housing. and we want to go ahead and put that on nice and carefully. Now we'll go ahead and grab our air filter housing that we took off from earlier, and make sure again the gasket's not on the surface, so that way it makes a proper seal. And we're going to go ahead and thread that back on now. If we look over here at the valve cover, we're going to go ahead and push that breather tube back in. So now what we will do is need to find the nuts here where I put them. There we go.
Nuts.
So we got our two 10mm nuts that we did not want to lose, and so we're going to go ahead and put them back on the threads, or the threaded rods. So we go ahead and get them back on, and go ahead and tighten them with your 10mm socket or wrench. And I don't know what the exact torque spec for this is, but we're just going to go ahead and do it so it's not overly tight, but it's not overly loose. About half a turn till they strip out. It's always what I find to be the best thing in the world.
One grunt.
And you just want to make sure they get tight enough that they make a good seal, so that way you don't have any outside dirt or debris getting in. So now let's go ahead and grab our cable. This is for, some models don't have this, but this model does. This is basically our anti-backfire, so it kind of prevents your engine from keeping running after you turn it off. So if we go ahead and plug that in. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and plug in our fuel solenoid. That's what I call it. Some people call it the anti-backfire. You can call it whatever, really. So we got ahead and got it plugged in. Now for this, it's really easy because red plugs into red, and so that's a pretty simple thing. Now your black wire, that's like that, is going to be your ground. And so that's why we wanted to hold on to this bolt from earlier. And we will go ahead and start to thread this back in like we're supposed to. That's fine. Go ahead and get that in there about hand tight, and then be sure to grab your 8mm socket now to finish putting this on the rest of the way. Again, you don't want it super tight, but you want it tight enough that it is making a good connection here. And if we get it a little bit more, again, you want to make sure this has a good connection, otherwise your fuel solenoid or your anti-backfire will not allow fuel to go into your carburetor, and your engine will not run properly, or run at all for that matter. Another thing is, don't forget to hook up your fuel line. I had to cut off the old fuel line, so I will go ahead and put a new fuel line on and hook it on, and then you'll just put your air filter back on up at the